Hello again. So now you have read about the language assessment process in the reading. Do you remember the steps to conduct it? We will revise them and inform you of some more helpful tips in this video. Generally, a language assessment process has many steps which can be classified into two major phases, preparation and assessment. Each contains several steps. Now let's go into each of the steps in details. In the first step of the planning phase, the teacher needs to become familiar with the local requirement on the language ability for assessment. The question is, what is the content of assessment and what the specific language skills or knowledge to be assessed are? Teachers have to be very clear that the assessment outcomes and assessment criteria, for example, will strongly affect the design of the assessment. Some examples of language assessment contents may be language competence levels, such as those on the CEFR, or specific lists of knowledge or skills, a sublist of academic vocabulary, a set of rules in grammar, etc. After knowing the contents for assessment or the assessment targets, the teacher plans the assessment methods, assessment instruments, activity, types, and amount of evidence required. At this stage, it is best to work with other teachers in the same school and to agree on the elements of the assessment plan, such as the assessment methods and the possibility for collaborating in marking students in team marking or double marking. In the planning step, teachers also have to decide the timing of the assessment, which can happen at certain points in the learning program. They also decide the person who assess, which may include the students beside the teachers. The teachers can plan to select or develop the assessment methods from a range of methods. In terms of familiarity, the most familiar method is testing, in which the test can be borrowed or self-designed. Besides tests, teachers can choose other alternatives such as observation, interviews, conferences, portfolios, projects, etc. In terms of the type of response they want, they can choose to assess students with selected response question, such as multiple choice, or constructed response question, such as essays. Next, as you can see, a range of assessment instruments can be selected or developed by the teachers to use in the language classroom. Many of the instruments call for student activeness in assessing themselves, such as journals and learning diaries. Many instruments are usually used only for formative purposes, namely anecdotal records and observation schemes. On the other hand, some instruments are for more formal and summative assessment, such as tests or skills. This is one example of a teacher's anecdotal record, showing what he or she has noted about Jason's progress in reading. And this is another example, a rather well-directed learning journal and diary by a student about the progress in writing essays. After planning, teacher can start the assessment phase by informing the student about the assessment and reach an agreement with them on the assessment. It's important that students understand several factors from the start: the kinds of assessment activities, the standards and level of performance expected, the type and amount of evidence, their responsibility, the suitable timing and place of the assessment. After this communication with students, teacher can start to realize the plan and collect the evidence of student learning. After collecting the data, teachers can choose the method of processing them. If the data are in numeric format, such as score from a test, teachers can calculate the statistic for the whole class to understand their overall results. Or if the data are not numeric, such as in the form of stories or comment, they can analyze the similarities and differences to reach some conclusion on student ability. Next, the teacher explains the results and provides feedback to the student based on the assessment contents and targets. They have several choices in doing so. 1. They can choose to compare students to each other. Students can be better or worse than their friends. In another way, they can compare students against the criteria and school standards. For one instance, they can judge a student to be able to speak fluently compared to the school standard. Finally, one great way of explaining the results and giving feedback is to tell students how they have progressed by comparing their performance now and the one in the past. Well, there are so many steps, right? Are you tired already? Fortunately, we are in the final step of language assessment now, namely the reporting of assessment results. Have you ever heard of reporting? To report the results of language assessment for students and other related people, teachers can select to report the scores of final tests only, or they can also report their comments and inferences to the student over time. They can also choose to go further and report a language profile describing all the features of the student language ability, as you can see in the table. Finally, when the assessment process completes, teachers can evaluate the whole process and think about how to improve it. They can review the entire process with other teachers or make some change and recommendations to the assessment process as well as the teaching learning program. This reflection is highly essential for them in developing their work through time. That's the end of the video. Thank you for being with us.